Okay, so what I would like to do now is I would like to talk about uploading a website onto the web. So the hour is late, the night is nearly upon us, so I shall proceed with haste. Last semester in SOF 6007, you made a website, and it sat there probably on your H drive since then. No one else could see it. It was a website in HTML, CSS, maybe even a bit of JavaScript, but it wasn't on the web. In order to put something, to have it visible on the internet, on the web, it needs to be on a special machine called a web server. And a web server is a machine that sits there all day on the web taking requests for pages. So someone might say, can I have page2.html? It goes, there you go. Can I have photo5.jpg? It says, there you go. So it's a special machine that sits on the web, and all it does all day is serve up files to people. Those files are usually HTML files, CSS files, possibly separate JavaScript files, and generally lots of images, JPEGs, GIFs, PNGs, whatever. Okay? There was a time when, if you were really brave, you would have set up a web server in your own home. Or if you were a small business and you were adventurous and cutting edge, you'd have the web server, sitting under a table in your office. People don't generally do that so much anymore. Mostly because it's a pain. And secondly, because there are companies who will host your website for you, and they'll worry about the backups and the securities and the denial of service attacks and the patches and all that stuff. And so there are quite a few of those. There would be a lot of different options, but I have seen, for example, as late as last week, an offer with one very reputable company, and they were doing it like for $4 a month for the entry level. So let's say you had a website, you wanted to put your CV on the web, you wanted more than just a Facebook or a Google Plus page and a blog, you wanted to actually show off that you could make websites, and this is what they look like. And in fairness, that's probably something you might want to be doing. You could sort that out for $4 a month. So like for $4 a month, would you bother getting out of bed in the morning to maintain your web server in your own home? It's just not worth it. Now, obviously, Amazon doesn't, run its entire empire for $4 a month. There are degrees. But bottom of the range, you could probably do $4 a month, no bother. You could have your stuff on the web for the world to see. We think of a web server as being one machine, but typically it's not anymore. It may be a server farm. It may be distributed at different parts of the planet, but we visualize it as a single machine. Many web servers use case-sensitive file names. So one of the first things you would need to do with your website before you upload it is you want to check out that your file names aren't going to cause you any grief. The Windows machine on which you developed the website would be fairly flexible and fairly generous. The web server might not be so nice. So one of the main problems people encounter is the case. On most, or at least on many, web servers, the file names are case sensitive. So Dan's page with an uppercase D and an uppercase BP is not the same file as Dan's page all in lowercase. Similarly, spaces and punctuations can cause trouble. So Dan's page with an apostrophe before the S and a space is probably going to cause you grief along the way somewhere. So for the 3 seconds it would take you to call it Dan's page with no spaces and no punctuation, it's probably worth doing, rather than suffer the drama and the hassle later. There was a time when Windows machines couldn't handle file extensions longer than 3 characters. So we ended up with .htm instead of .html in some cases. It doesn't really matter whether you say .htm or .html, but you don't want to be in a situation where you're coding up your website and you're saying, okay, was that one now a HTML or a HTML? Because you need to know. So rather than try and remember, always just go with one or the other. Similarly with the file names, you can use uppercase and lowercase characters as long as you remember what you called it. But who wants that extra piece of thing to remember? So what the cool people do is they do all their file names in lowercase and they always use .html. So if you want to be a card-carrying nerd, that's what you're going to do. That's what we do in the community. Okay? But you can do what you like as long as you remember what you do. Pick a plan and then stick to it. Now, there are a variety of tools that you can use to automatically generate the HTML for your web pages. We didn't let you near those in semester 1 because we wanted you to learn how it was actually done. You guys are going to be the mechanics, not just drivers of cars. So you need to know what's going on under the hood. So you would have actually learned HTML for that reason. Many people make web pages and they don't know much about HTML at all. They have a variety of tools at their disposal that they use to design the layout of the page. They might say, make this bold here, change the color of this to blue, change the color of this there to light green. And then they would just say to that tool, okay, save that now as my website, please. Even in Microsoft Word, you can say, save this page, save this as a website, and it'll go away and do it. And so many of those tools then can also communicate directly with the web server. So Dreamweaver, for example, is an industrial strength, top quality web development tool. It's the main one that people use. And it gives you access not only to what the page would look like, but also to the HTML and CSS underneath. And you can modify it visually, or you can actually go in and change the code. So that's very, very popular, very, very good. If you end up doing a lot of web development, that's probably the tool you'll end up using. If you were using Dreamweaver today for your site, you could have said to Dreamweaver, this is the name of my web server, this is the name of this is my username, this is my password, this is the folder where it goes. And you just clicked a button and Dreamweaver would have gone off and negotiated with the web server and done all that. Some tools, or sometimes you choose to just publish the website to your hard disk locally. So the tool generates the site and stores it locally. And then it's up to you as the author to manually put it on the web server. And so that's today's task. Taking a page from the local machine and copying it up to a web server. There are maybe 3 or 4 ways to do that. Do you know the way in Dropbox you can set it up so that Dropbox just appears like a drive on your machine? And you can't do it here, but you can do it at home. And then if you want to put something in Dropbox, you just drag and drop it in. Well, you could set up the web server so that it appears to be a drive in your machine. And you could probably just drag and drop and you're done. Also, there are programs that you can run on your machine that will negotiate with the web server on your behalf. So it's not quite like dragging and dropping a folder onto the machine, but it's still quite good. You drag and drop the files that you want. You give that program your username and password. It lets you browse the remote server as if it was like a folder. The interface is sometimes a bit clunky, not as responsive as you would like, but it's great, gets the job done. I'm going to give you a link to one of them, and you might find it interesting to install it on your home machine and just see how it works. And it'll even give you a list of all of the commands that it's issuing and everything. Another way then is a web interface, which I'm going to show you, and then we're going to look at file transfer protocol. File transfer protocol, or FTP, we usually use as like a verb. So although it's a noun, file transfer protocol is a noun, we say things like, I was in the middle of FTPing my site last night and there was a power cut. Or someone calls you for coffee and you say, just give me 2 minutes, I just have to FTP this to the server. So we use FTP like a verb. I'm not sure if we'd find that in any dictionaries yet, but that's the way we use it. You're familiar with the web interface to Dropbox. So there's a way you can log into Dropbox and you see a list of your files and you can upload a file or you can download a file or you can kind of move things around, but it's a bit clunky. You can't quite drag and drop like you'd like, and if you want to make a new folder, you have to create the folder. Well, it looks just like that if you go to use the web interface to a hosting service. So this one here from HostCentric is one of the companies that does that kind of thing. And you can see it gives you a list of your folders and it shows you the files inside, and you can maybe rename a file there or upload files, things like that. No. Today, however, we're looking at completing an FTP session on a Unix machine, on a Unix server using Unix commands. So Unix is an operating system that was developed at Berkeley in the 1960s, and it was widely used, and to this day it's the main operating system of the web. So most web servers, the machine itself is running Unix as an operating system, and then it's probably running an open source web server program called Apache. So an awful lot of the machinery of the web is running on Unix. Similarly, routers, a lot of them tend to be running Unix. Now, obviously, you can buy your Microsoft web servers as well. Apple was in the server business for quite a long time, and it kind of, I think it got bored or something, or it's gone off to make iPads and iPods now. But Apple had a very good web server also. In fact, the one we're using today is an Apple sitting over somewhere. And Mac OS is actually built on top of Unix. The flavor of Unix you're most familiar with is probably Linux. And Android is built on top of Unix also. So it's widely used, even though it's probably nearly maybe 50 years on now at this stage. So I'm not going to tell you all about Unix today. I'm going to tell you about the Unix you need to do your FTP session. So the first thing to remember is that Unix commands are in lowercase and they're case sensitive. So one of the handiest commands is ls, which lists all the files in a directory. So if you say ls, it'll list all the files and directories. Now, in Unix you call them directories. I call them folders. If I say folder or directory, I mean the same thing. I try to say directory and folder comes out of my mouth, and I can't stop it. Move will allow you to move a file from one place to another, but we're not going to do that. CP copies a file from one place to another, so you could make a copy with a new name or make a copy with the same name in a new location. We're not going to do that either. RM removes a file. So it's basically how you delete something. One of the handiest things about Unix, and maybe the only reason you would bother to do it this way, rather than using one of the other ways, is you can have wildcards in your command lines. So you could say rm dan star.html, and that would remove all of the files that start with Dan and end with .html. So it would delete dan1.html, danny2.html, daniel.html. Unix uses a hierarchical directory system, like most operating systems that we use, but because our operating systems are so visual now, we've kind of forgotten that to some extent. But in Unix, there's no forgetting it. You'll be in a directory at any given time, and you can only see that unless you start using paths. No. So mkdir is short for mkdir, and that makes a directory. So if you say mkdir mysite, it'll create that folder. rmdir will delete a directory. And sometimes it'll insist you remove all the stuff out of the directory before you can kill it off. It's kind of as a safety precaution. Now, cd then is used to change directory so that if you're at a particular level in the file structure in the hierarchy and there's directories under that, you can move down into one of them. So it's a change directory mysite allows you to move down into mysite. Now, I'm going to tell you about paths, but you're probably not going to use them. They wreck my head. But if you were going to be using Unix a lot, you'd have to get to grips with paths. And then you could kind of do anything you want from anywhere you want. So where we'd be doing a lot of cd this, cd that, cd to get where we want, with paths you can just, wherever you happen to be, talk about, I want you to get that from over there to move that over there. So I'll just try and explain it a bit. So imagine we're in a directory called Europe. And inside in that directory there's Ireland, France, Germany, and Spain. So the current directory that we're in is Europe. I could list the contents of the Ballincollig directory without having to go there. So I'm in the Europe directory. Under me is Ireland. Under Ireland there's a Cork directory, and under Cork there's a Ballincollig directory. I could list all of the contents of the Ballincollig directory just by saying ls Ireland / Cork / Ballincollig. And that relative path assumes that the current directory is the one above Ireland. So you're talking about relative to where you are. So if you were to say ls Ireland / Cork / Ballincollig, and you were already in Cork, it wouldn't work. You would be looking for Ireland under Cork. So it's relative to where you are. You can also have absolute paths as well, where you start at the root of the directory structure and specify from there. And then cd space ... moves you up a level. So if I was in the folder Ballincollig, well, if I was in the folder Ireland and I wanted to move down into Cork, I'd say cd Cork, and then I'd be in the Cork folder. If I was in the Cork directory and I wanted to move down into the Ballincollig directory, I'd say cd Ballincollig. If I was in the Ballincollig directory and I wanted to move back up to the Cork directory, well, then I'd say cd ... And I don't need to say Cork because there's only one way up. When you're going down, you could be going down into any of the subdirectories. But when you're coming up a level, there's only one place to go, up. There's only one up. I'll visualize this in a second, you might see it better. Okay? So imagine we have a directory called music. Inside that we have Radiohead, U2, and Riscop as directories. And they, in turn, have subdirectories in there. If I was in Pablo Honey and I wanted to get to Zuropa, I'd have to say cd ... to bring me up to Radiohead. I'd be in Radiohead then. And I'd say cd ... to bring me up a level to music. Then I'd be in the music directory. And then I'd have to say cd U2 to get into the U2 directory, and then cd Zuropa to get into the Zuropa directory. Or, if I was in Pablo Honey, I could say cd space ... / U2 / Zuropa. So I could go up, up, down, down. So you could see how this could wreck your head after a while. But, well, no, actually, it wrecks your head now. It gets better with time. Now, it can get so confusing. My favorite command, pwd, which is basically where am I? So you say pwd, it tells you where you are. Because it's not visual, and it's not like you're in a couple of places at one time. In a Windows-based operating system, you might have 5 windows open, and you can go from one to the other just with a click. In Unix, you're only going to be in one place at any one time. Only one directory is going to be current. So pwd tells you what the directory is that you're in at the moment. So then for our FTP session, we need some special commands, and the setup with the FTP is straightforward enough. You need to get into the FTP server and then go to the folder on the FTP server where the files are going to go. So you go to the appropriate directory on the remote server. Then you go to the directory on the local machine where the files are. And then you use a command called put to transfer them. So you set up the place you want to go there. You set up the place they're coming from here, and then you shoot. So you line them up first and then shoot. Okay? You can start an FTP session by saying FTP, and then to go to the server you would say open the servername.com. Or if you just say FTP, the servername.com, it'll assume that you want to open a connection. It's possible to log in anonymously to some servers, but that's not really done anymore. But in the olden days, that was the main way of distributing things on the internet, using anonymous FTP servers. So you'll usually need a username and a password. On the server you're using, the websites are all hosted in a folder again called sites. So when you log in, you have to do cd sites. Then you create a directory with your name. Then you go into that directory, and then that's where you're going to put your web page. And then locally, you go to the local directory where your website is, and then you can do the put. Now, the simplest way is to put your local stuff at the root of the H drive, and then you don't have to go fishing around for it. So CD navigates on the remote machine when you're in an FTP session. So normally CD changes directory on the machine you're talking about, but when you're in FTP, CD navigates the remote machine. And then you have LCD for the local machine. Okay. I haven't seen the local LS and the local PWD work. And I've poked around now and changed my notes a few times around, and I'm not convinced by that. No, I've had 50 years to check, like, but you know. Now, one other thing for text files, so HTML, CSS, JavaScript, maybe a text file, any kind of code, that needs to be transferred in ASCII mode, which would be the default mode when you go in. But if you have an image or a sound file or a video or a shockwave movie or a flash movie or something, you need to transfer that using binary mode. So you switch to bin and then transfer that. It's just to do with the way the transfer works, like your images can get screwed up if you send them in ASCII instead of binary. And actually 9 times out of 10 they're probably okay, but you need to do it anyway as a precaution. So that's just that there. So put then copies a file from the local directory to the remote server. And that's what you use to upload your pages. So if your page was called page1.html, if the remote server, if the current directory in the remote server is the one that you're looking for, and the current directory in the local server is where page 1 is, then you can just say put page1.html and it'll send it. You can do mput and use a wildcard if you want. So if your pages were called page1.html, page2.html, page 3, and you had like 300 of them, instead of going one by one, you could say mput page star.html, and it would send all of the files that begin with page and end with .html and have something between. So page something.html, they'd all go. So that can be very handy. And then at the end, you want to make sure you quit out of it, because FTP isn't that secure either, so you don't leave that connection open too long. One final thing, many FTP servers have a default file name that you can use if someone looks just for a folder. So if on Praxis your folder would be like, let's say your page is page1.html. To find that, you might have to say praxis.cite.ie/tilde/maclovin/danmurphy/page1.html. However, if you made your home page called index.html, you could say praxis.cite.ie/tilde/maclovin/danmurphy/ and if you don't mention the file name of the folder, the server will give you index.html by default. So that's why when you go to say rte.ie, you don't have to go rte.ie/homepage.html. They've called the homepage index.html. And so when you say rte.ie/, by default you'll get index.html. So you usually make the front door to your website called index.html, and then people only need to specify as far as the folder that it's in. So if you were to change the names of your files to index.html, you needn't say index.html then. But that's just a small thing that you should know about. But it's not a big thing. So any questions on that? Okay. So thanks for bearing with me now. That was a bit rushed.